Welcome to Casual Friday. So I have a few things. I have a quick announcement, and I want to talk about my birthday plans, my knitting related birthday plans. And then I want to talk about gift giving and sharing and relationships and how that's kind of all intertwined for me. I thought it'd be a good thing to talk about since my birthday is tomorrow, in case you didn't pick up on that. So let's get started. Oh, and I'll put some links down if you want to jump from one section to another, just like I do on my Technique Tuesday videos. So the first announcement is that I have an article in the current issue of Interweave Knitwear. It's the Spring-Summer 2018 issue. And the article is called Decoding Lace Shaping on page 46. So you might want to run out and get yourself a copy of that. And that's my announcement. So tomorrow is my birthday. I mentioned in last week's video that I'm going to be taking this Latvian mitten class, which starts tomorrow afternoon. So I'm excited about that. And then I've started already my process for making my birthday cake. I do make my own birthday cake because then I get what I want and I don't make anybody else miserable with my demands. I feel like it's my responsibility to make sure that I'm happy on my birthday and that I get what I want and not place that responsibility on other people. That doesn't mean that if that's how you live, that's wrong. It's just better for me to be direct about what it is I want and make sure that I get it. So the birthday cake that I have been making the past few years is, I'll show you a picture of last year's cake. It's so good. It's called a Samoa Bundt cake. It is supposed to look like a Samoa Girl Scout cookie and sort of be reminiscent of that when you eat it. It's so good. It's like it's a marble cake. It's got a butter batter and a chocolate batter marble cake in the bundt pan, and then the icing is dulce de leche, salted caramel, toasted coconut, and then you drizzle the chocolate. It's so good. So if you like salted caramel, if you like a little bit of chocolate or quite a bit of chocolate, but not total chocolate, and you like coconut, it's really, really good. I'll put a link down to the recipe down below. It kind of takes a while to make. It's like a 2-day process. I do the first steps the day before, and then I make the actual cake on my birthday. So that's what I'll be doing tomorrow morning. So that's two things. That's the mitten class and then my birthday cake. But I ordered myself a gift earlier this month, and it arrived in the mail on Monday. So I wanted to show you what I ordered. I want to explain a little bit what it is. A few months back, I posted on Facebook that I was super happy that I was following 2 Twitter accounts on Twitter because they made a huge difference in my enjoyment of Twitter and just my day in general. And one of those accounts is called Emergency Kittens, and the other one is called We Rate Dogs. And I just love them. And so I had mentioned on Facebook that I really, really like those accounts. And my friend Rachel, the one who drove me all over the Yorkshire Dales 10 years ago, she commented back and said, oh, well, if you like those, maybe you would also like these. And she gave me a whole list of different Twitter accounts. And so I subscribed to all of them at first. And then some of them I'm like, well, I don't really care about this one. And I unsubscribe, but there's one that I just love and I really look forward to. When I get up in the morning, I look to see what this woman has posted. Her name is Susanna Crompton, and her Twitter ID is Zwartbliss IE. So it's Zwartbliss Ireland is her website and the name of her farm. She has a sheep farm in Ireland. And the sheep that she raises are called, or a breed that came originally from the Netherlands, and they were kind of going extinct at some point. They had originally been bred for milk and meat, not for their wool. And they were kind of going out of favor, I guess, at some point, and there's looked like they were going to be going extinct. And somebody decided to ship some over to the UK, and the climate was pretty similar in the place in Netherlands as compared to the UK. And so they were doing really well, and then eventually they were brought to Ireland. And so there are a number of sheep breeders in Ireland who have these kind of sheep. But Susanna posts snippets of video of her day as she goes through her day. And it's just fascinating. And what's these sheep, so zwartles is a Dutch word, and it means black, and then with blaze. So zwart is black and bles is blaze. And so they're black sheep, and they have a white blaze down the middle of their nose. They don't dock their tails, and the tip of the tail is white. And then the back two legs have at least some white, might be just a little bit, or might go like kind of a longer sock. And then the front two legs may or may not have white on either one of them. So, I'll show you a picture. So this is what those sheep look like. So and then that's a picture of blankets that she worked with this woolen mill to design that represent the sheep. So the big thick stripe of white represents the blaze on their nose, and then the pair of thinner stripes below represent the white of the backs of the legs, and then the single stripe on top represents the little tip of their tail. So these blankets are woven with zwartles wool, and then the white is Irish wool to make these blankets. But, so I really enjoyed, watching these little video clips every day. And then it was lambing season earlier this month. I mean, it's still lambing season in other parts of the UK and probably United States in different places. Just depends on the weather and how people time things. But I'd get up every morning and there would be, oh, here's the new twins that were born last night, or here, they're so cute. And then sometimes she'd walk in the barn with the video, our camera going, and there'd be a ewe in labor who maybe needed some help. Either the lamb was large, or she was the first-time mother, or maybe there were twins that were tangled up, or whatever. So then she would keep the camera rolling, she'd set it down, and then she'd go and you'd watch this woman, help this ewe, she'd get things turned around so then the lamb could get, it could be born, and then the mother would start taking care of it and stuff. So it was just, I just loved it. So I started looking up more about her, like looking at her website and finding out more about her and reading articles about her. And I saw that she worked with this woolen mill to produce hand knitting yarn from her sheep. And I guess also she would collect the fleeces from other breeders of zwartles sheep around Ireland, and then they bring them all to this mill, and then they would create the yarn from it. So I thought, oh, yarn. And so I thought, recently I thought I really not only want to learn more about different yarn constructions, but I want to learn more about different breeds of sheep, like the wool that different sheep breeds, like the differences and trying them out. So I thought, well, I'll order some of this yarn. And I looked online, and it was, I thought, pretty reasonably priced for limited edition, specialty breed yarn. I think it's 8.5 euros per 100 gram skein, which is around $10.50 maybe. So, I mean, if you think of Cascade 220 as like $9.50, it's not bad at all. And this is special yarn. So I thought, okay, I'm going to order that. And then I saw what the shipping was. The shipping was like about more than half of what the yarn cost, maybe 2/3 of it. And I thought, oh, that's kind of expensive. So I was hemming and hawing about it. I really wanted the yarn. you know, it's coming from Ireland. It was probably I was thinking it's probably one of those things where you have to sign for it when it comes, and it's probably something about the shipping is why it's so expensive. But it was expensive, and I didn't know if I wanted to do it. And I thought, you know what? It's my birthday month. This is my birthday present to me. I'm ordering this yarn. So I ordered the yarn. And there's like, thank you for your order. It's being processed. And then I didn't hear anything. I didn't know, what was going on. And then on Monday, I heard the letter carrier banging at the door. He's putting the mail in there. And so I went down a while later and I saw there was a package leaned up against the front windows. And I thought, well, geez, I wonder if that's the yarn. I'm surprised I didn't have to sign for it. And I brought it in. It was the yarn. And then I looked at the postage and I'm like, well, that postage stamp is way cheaper than what I paid. I wonder what that's about. And so I emailed her and just asked about it. She's like, oh, it was a super busy day. That day. We must have sent it by regular post. Normally we send it by registered so that you can track it. And she says, I'm really glad it actually made it to your front door and I'll refund you the difference. I'm really sorry about that. And I knew that there had to be an explanation, and I'm like, oh, bonus. I get some money off of the postage. So I want to show you. So I ordered 9 hanks of it. So it's going to be really hard to see this on camera. It's really, really dark. It's, the sheep are black, but the natural black is really like a dark, dark, dark brown. So I was, squeezing it and looking at it, and I was looking at reading the label, and it talks on here about how I've collected pure Zwartbliss wool, bringing the raw fleeces to Cushendale woolen mills in County Kilkenny to be cleaned, carded, and spun into a limited quantity of yarn. And I thought, Cushendale. That sounds familiar. And I didn't bring it to my. 1 second. Okay. So it turns out I have some yarn from Cushendale. I don't know if that's gonna. There you go. So I have some Cushendale yarn. I have 2 skeins of this yarn. A friend of mine at the dog park brought me from. He went to Ireland with his wife last fall, and he actually had a miserable trip that I won't go into, but he did happen to go to some place where they were selling this yarn, and he thought of me. I mean, he's a photographer. He'd taken pictures of my dog with that were just amazing. That he just showed up one day to the dog park and said, "Oh, I have something for you," and these gorgeous pictures of my dog. Just amazing. And so then I said, "Oh, what do you do in the winter? Keep your hands warm when you're taking photos," because I had seen him taking photos in the winter, and he's like, "Well, sometimes I use a really, really thin pair of gloves, but usually I just go barehanded and keep my hands in my pockets." And so I knit him a pair of photographer's gloves that are missing the little tips of the index fingers and thumb. So I really liked that idea of him giving me the gift of something that he's really good at, that has something to do with something we both appreciate, which is the dog park. And then I knitted him this pair of photographer's gloves that has something to do with he really likes, that I appreciate. It was like a back and forth thing. And then I had done some genealogy for him without him asking me. I just kind of did it and found a bunch of stuff out that he didn't know about. So he brought me back this yarn from Ireland, and he's like, "Oh, it's probably not enough to make anything." I said, "No, I think it's enough. I just have to figure out what to make." And we all know that I'm no good at figuring out stash yarn, but I did finally figure it out. I asked him if it was okay. I said, "Is it okay with you if I make a sweater for my dog out of this?" Because then I thought, well, then he'll see the yarn that I use. He's like, "Oh no, I love it." So that's my plan for this yarn, but it's from Cushendale Woolen Mills as well. It says, "An authentic Irish woolen mill, a history since the year 1204. So what I was wondering was, well, what kind of wool is this? It doesn't say the breed. So I was looking online, and I to see if I could figure it out. And I don't know that there is a breed other than Irish sheep. But what I found out was that this Cushendale mill is like one of 3 mills remaining in Ireland that produce yarn for hand knitting. They have millions of sheep in Ireland, but most of them are bred for meat, and then most of that is exported. So they don't really concern themselves too much about the actual fleece, because apparently because there's such a northern climate and it's so damp, they don't have a lot of sun. The white sheep tend to have a kind of a yellow, creamier fleece, and they get dirty, and with all the dampness and everything. And so in order to sort of do something with the fleece, so much gets wasted from the cleaning process. It's just so much work. So they are trying to figure out other ways of using the wool, but there just isn't that much of an industry in hand knitting yarn in Ireland, even though they have all those sheep. So I thought that was interesting. So I'm gonna compare, because they're spun by the same mill, but they're not really the same type of, they just look different. So I don't know if that has to do with the breed of the sheep or just the process of how it was spun or what. So this Cushendale wool is apparently very good for like color work, because it's sticky wool. So it's great for steeking. But so anyway, I thought that was really cool. So that's what I'm doing for my birthday. I'm experimenting. I bought this wool, and I'm going to experiment with it. I'm doing some swatching. I haven't finished a swatch yet. I'm like halfway through a swatch, and I'll report back when I learn more about what the yarn is like after it's been washed, because it's a rustic yarn. It's like it's not something you'd wear against your bare skin by any means. You'd have to wear something underneath it, which I typically do anyway. But I'm going to learn more about this in the weeks coming forward. So because it's my birthday, and I was, and this yarn that I got reminded me of the yarn that my friend at the dog park got me, and the exchange of things that we've been doing for each other back and forth, just because we enjoy it, and because our particular talents are such that we can do that for each other. I mean, he's not a close friend of mine. He's a good friend from the dog park, but we don't socialize outside the dog park. But we appreciate what each other's talents and skills and willingness to share without expectation of getting something back. So I really value that, and those are the kinds of acquaintances that I have where I will knit for them, because mostly I only knit for very close friends and family. I never knit on commission. I will not knit for money. No matter how demanding somebody is, that I really should sell that. That's a completely different topic for another day, but I don't do that. But once in a while, I'll come across somebody who I think they are knit worthy, and I will do whatever I can to provide them with something if they want it, because I don't care. I always ask people, I'd really like to knit you something. Well, would you like something? Would you like that? And it's okay to say no. I'd rather you say no than to try to be polite and say yes and then not ever use the thing that I knit for you. So when I'd been doing genealogy for a couple of years, there's a woman named Phoebe who contacted me on Ancestry.com and said, I was just in Minnesota visiting family over the holidays, and I was going through my grandmother's box of photos, and I found these 2 photos in the box, and I don't know who these people are. I mean, I know their names, Albert Forder and William Forder. She said, but I can't figure out what their connection is to my grandmother's family. And I saw that they're on your tree, and I'm wondering if you have any idea, because I see that they lived in the same area, the same community where my grandmother lived. So I'm wondering what you might know. So this is like in January, so it was right after the holidays. And I didn't know the connection. But I said, let me tell you who this family is and what my connection to this family is, and tell you kind of their timeline and where they lived and when they moved and when they immigrated and all that. And then maybe there's some parallel in your family. So the family, so the photos that she sent me were these two young men, Albert Forder, who was wearing a hat, looked very much like a Civil War soldier's hat. And then there was William Forder, who was, in a suit, kind of a little tie and a suit. He wasn't wearing a uniform. And Phoebe had done some research on the photographer, J.J. Sundquist, and saw that he was a photographer in Dassel in like the mid-1880s. And so that would be about the time that the William and Albert Forder on my tree that looked like they were about that same age that the men in this photograph were. So, but she just couldn't figure out how they were connected to her grandmother. So I explained to her, well, there's a man there's a couple, William Forder, it's a different William Forder, but William Forder and Maria Wells. And they were born in like the early 1800s. So William Forder was born in 1809 in Alton, which is in Hampshire, it's in southeast England. He was born in Alton the year that Jane Austen moved into Chawton Cottage, just outside of Alton. Jane's brother owned that house, so Jane and her sister moved in and lived in that house. That's where she wrote Pride and Prejudice and several other books, and she was living there when she died a number of years later. And so Jane Austen and her sister would help the poor, and they would often teach children to read as well. She did not teach William Forder to read because he was illiterate, and it was very common. He was the child of an agricultural laborer. But when he grew up, he married a young woman named Maria Wells, and in 1836. And then in the next couple of years, they had two boys. They had William Forder, so named for his father, and then they had their son James. And then they immigrated to the United States in about 1839, and they ended up in Washington County, Indiana, about 35 miles from the Kentucky border. And they ended up having 6 boys, and one of the boys died in infancy. So they had William and James in England, and then they had Albert, Robert, and Milton. So they had these 5 boys who survived childhood. And then they had 5 girls. They had 6 girls, and again, one died in infancy. And the oldest of the 5 girls was my great-great-grandmother, Emma Forder. So Emma had 2 brothers. She had 5 brothers, but 2 of them were William and Albert. When the Civil War began, Indiana was really kind of divided between the Union and the Confederacy. So you would see people in one town would be supporting different things. Even people in one family would not necessarily agree on whether to support the Union or the Confederacy. And they're very close to Kentucky, which is the South. And so it's understandable that there was kind of a mixture of feelings in that area. Well, in the 3 oldest boys, William, James, and Albert, all enlisted like in 1861 and joined the Union Army. And then that first spring in April 1862, Albert got typhoid fever and he died. And the following month is when the last Forder child, his youngest sister, was born a month after he died. And they gave her the middle name of Albertine after him. So 1862, in the spring of 1862, Albert dies. Then in August of 1862, the 4th of the Forder brothers enlists. He was 17 years old. He enlisted in the Union Army. And then the following spring, he was injured in combat at the siege of Vicksburg, which was kind of a turning point in the Civil War. So he was injured and ended up in a military hospital for 6 months. and then he died of his wounds. And then the spring after that, so you had the spring of 1862, Albert dies. The spring of 1863, Robert is injured and then dies in the fall, a couple of weeks before his 19th birthday. And then the spring of 1864, William, the oldest of the 40 brothers, he contracted measles and died in a field hospital in Chattanooga. So of the 4 Forder boys who enlisted in the Army for the Civil War, only one came home, and that was James. And he had married right before the war. He had a little girl. He and his wife and daughter moved to Illinois, but the rest of the remaining Forder family was still in Indiana. The youngest of the Forder boys, Milton, was never old enough to enlist in the Army. So the family remained in Indiana for another, 6 years, something like that. And in 1871, the entire family, all of the girls and Milton, the youngest boy, and their parents, an uncle and a cousin who had just immigrated from England, the entire extended family, they all packed up and they moved to Meeker County, Minnesota. And that's where Dassel, Minnesota is. That's where the photographer was located that these photographs Phoebe had were taken. So Milton, the youngest of those Forder boys, one that was not in the Civil War, his first 2 sons were named Albert and William, or William and then Albert, after his brothers who had died. So, and they were about the age that the men in the picture were in the 1880s when the photographer and Dassel was there. So we thought it was weird that the one guy was wearing this hat. We couldn't figure out what his uniform was. And we still did. I said, does any of that sound familiar to you? And Phoebe's like, no, nope, none of that's familiar. Her family, nobody immigrated at those times or from those places. And we thought maybe they're just school friends of her grandmother or something. We just didn't know. So we kind of left it, and that was it. And then 6 months later, I woke up and I had an email from Phoebe, and she said, I'm here in Minnesota with one of my second cousins, and we're doing a genealogy trip, and we were just in the Meeker County courthouse yesterday, looking up our great grandfather. They had a mutual great grandfather, looking up his birth record because he was adopted. And she said, my grandmother, the one who had the photos, my grandmother knew that his birth mother's last name was Pluse, which she spelled Pluse. So she knew it was Pluse, but that's all she knew. So they went and they looked in the birth record books, so these huge ledger books in the 19th century. They didn't have birth certificates. They just kept a big ledger of everyone born in the township in sort of date order. And so they found their great-grandfather, and his parents were Thomas Pluse and Emma Forder, my great-great-grandmother. And they found 3 other birth records for 3 older children. I only knew about the 2 oldest. I hadn't known about the 3rd one, and I certainly hadn't heard about the 4th one that was then given up for adoption. So it was, so that turned out Phoebe and I are 3rd cousins, and it took a while to, so we solved that the connection to her family, the connection of the Forder family to her family, but we really hadn't solved the mystery of who Albert and William Forder were in those photographs. We thought we did, but we really hadn't. And it took another year before we really figured it out. And what it was, my father had a big box of stuff that he had gotten from his mother. And he said, I have this big box of documents and photos that I got from my mother, and it's in the basement. I don't know where it is. I keep looking for it, but I can't find it. And so a full year after Phoebe figured out the connection of the Forder family to her family, I got this box in the mail, and I opened up, there's all this, great stuff in there. And then there was this little envelope of 3 photographs. And 2 of them I had seen before. One of them was William Forder. One of them was Albert Forder. And then there was a third one. And I turned the photos over, and on the backs were the names of each of the persons, just like Phoebe had on hers. And the third photo was Robert Forder. And under each one of them it said, killed in Civil War. So having that third one with the Robert, so they're like, okay, these are Civil War photos, but it didn't make any sense to us that these photos were produced 20 some years after they had died in another state. But then it dawned on me that photography technology had advanced. Back in the Civil War, a photo was exposed directly on medium, on whatever the image was going to be produced on. So if it was a tintype, it was right on the metal. And it wasn't until later that they had the technology to have a negative that could then produce multiple prints on paper. So what they had done was they had taken these single photographs that they had had of these young men, and the photographer took a picture of those original photographs, produced a negative, and then was able to produce prints. And I'm like, why did this not occur to me? Because how often do you pull your phone out and take a picture of something that somebody else had that already exists? It just never occurred to me that that's how a photo would have been reproduced from earlier times. And so we finally figured out who those young men were in the photos, and then we had the third one to fill out the set. So I knew that sometime after Emma's first 2 children were born, that her husband was out of the picture. I assumed that he had died. And then she married my great-great-grandfather, Jervis Silliman, and they had a couple of kids and moved on. And I knew about these first 2 sons because they continued to live with my great-great-grandmother after she was married to her second husband. Once I realized that Phoebe's great-grandfather was the 4th child of my great-grandmother with her first husband, and that there had been a 3rd child as well with no death record anywhere, and there's no death record for her husband either, that we think it's possible that the 3rd son was also given up for adoption. And because Phoebe would have had 4 sons under the age of 5 by the time that 4th child was born in 1877. She married my great-great-grandfather a year later in 1878. So it's really not clear what happened to her first husband, Thomas Plews, whether he just took off, whether he died. Again, there's no death record, no cemetery record, no indication that he actually died. So it's really not clear what happened. The marriage was over either because he died or he left. And the 2 youngest children somehow, and the 2 youngest children no longer lived with Emma after she married my great-great-grandfather. So Emma is probably one of my favorite ancestors because she was born in 1849 and died in 1949, just a few weeks short of her 100th birthday. And this time period, she is enumerated by name on every census record that enumerates people by name. So I have all these census records. So there's so much documentation, like vital record information began in her lifetime. And a lot of privacy laws prevent you looking at records after that time when she died. So she really was born and lived in an ideal time. And she was a really fascinating woman. She was married 4 times. So she divorced my great-great-grandfather after 20 years. His first wife divorced him after 20 years in 1873. So this is like when I started to realize divorce wasn't really as uncommon as we're led to believe. And even if you couldn't get a legal divorce or couldn't afford it, that didn't mean that you stayed with your spouse. People were migrating all over the country and starting their lives again, and Emma was no exception. And so it was a really fascinating view of what could she have done if with 4 children under the age of 5 and no husband, whether he died or left, what could she have done? And the choices that she did make, and maybe also, just the scope of the choices that she made were really interesting. And she and my great-great-grandfather ended up migrating to the state of Washington. And after she divorced him in like 1898, she got married right away again to her 3rd husband and stayed with him till he died. And then I lost track of her. Eventually, I found her in a very unexpected place, which was in East Texas. So how does a woman whose husband dies in the early 1900s in the state of Washington end up in East Texas, married to an English immigrant who had been living in Boston for years before that? I think she may have been a mail-order middle-aged bride, that she had come down to live with her sister in Phoenix, Arizona after her 3rd husband died, and that somehow she may have answered an ad. The reason that I think this is because, again, all of the documentation that is available in the time frame that Emma lived in, and some of the laws that were passed because of the immigration, the huge influx of immigrants. She married Henry Dutheridge in like 1908. Just the year before, a law was passed that said a woman's citizenship status is directly related to her husband's. So if her husband became a naturalized citizen, then she would become a naturalized citizen. But if a woman was already a citizen and married a man who was an alien, she lost her citizenship. And that's what happened to Emma. She was born in Indiana in 1849, and when she married her 4th husband in 1908, she lost her American citizenship. And then over the years, as immigrant women who could not read and write or speak English became citizens through their husbands who were required to be able to speak English and read and write, people were outraged that these women were allowed to become citizens. And so, and then as women got the right to vote, they changed the law so that naturalization was independent. A woman could become naturalized even if her husband wouldn't or couldn't. And if a man became naturalized, his wife didn't automatically. So Emma's husband did not become naturalized until after that 1922 law was passed. He became naturalized in like 1924 or something like that. Oddly enough, the United States government did not say, oh, you know what? When you were a natural-born citizen and we took away your citizenship and then we passed this other law, we're not going to give you back your citizenship. You have to be naturalized. So she had to become a naturalized citizen in 1924. She didn't have to file her first papers, her declaration of intent. She only had to file a petition for naturalization. But on those documents, it listed when and where she married her husband and how long she had been living in Texas. And the day that she married her husband was the day after she arrived in Texas, which is why I think she was probably a mail-order bride. Maybe not, but I'm very good at making up stories in my head about Emma and her life. And every time I get a new piece of information, it increases my understanding of her and increases my sympathy for her. Because there have been times when I've been very disapproving of her in different times, and I just think that mostly she was a survivor. So I think some of my favorite cousins are my third cousins, or people I've met through genealogy, and it's because they've done so much work themselves. And so that when we find each other and we can fit the two pieces together, that whole sharing of information is a gift. It's something that we each can give each other, and it enriches our lives. And then we have a relationship on top of it, which I think a lot of times really is what gifts are, is that they're a symbol of a relationship that you have. And so like when I knit something or I do genealogy for somebody just as a favor, that is an expression of my relationship to that person, an expression of my love or whatever. It's like, I made this knitted thing for you because I love you, and all that time I've spent knitting this, I was thinking about you, and here it's something that I hope that you can use. And so it's really that way with genealogy too. I mean, the documents and the photographs that people share with each other. I mean, I really had nothing from my dad's side of the family. He had nothing. There's so many divorces, generation after generation after generation, and these families that would split up, and so the family storybooks were lost, and the photos, somebody has photos somewhere, but you lose these connections with people. And so when you meet somebody like Phoebe, who's like, here's this thing I found these are people on your tree. Here, do you know who they are? And it's just that willingness to share and be helpful to each other. So Phoebe and I, we keep in contact with each other, and so it's 2.5 years after she sent that initial message to me. We're still in contact. And I came across somebody on my tree that she is not related to in any way. But it was somebody where they were involved in a significant news event that I really thought would probably make it into the North Carolina history books. And I just didn't know what kind of resources would be available. And it turns out Phoebe works in a library in the genealogy department in North Carolina. So I asked her just like, where would I find, like, what sort of resources are there? Are there any online resources or any books, or, what could I do? So she just went to her library and she looked it up. She said, well, I found a few things here, and she sent them to me. And she said, I said, oh, okay. So because there were good footnotes in those resources, and then maybe there would be some way I could get a hold of those books. And she goes, well, I tell you what. She said, I'm going to the Veterans Day parade next month, and it's right across the street, where it starts is right across the street from the state archives. I'll just go in the state archives and look some things up for you. And she did it. And I mean, I know she did it partly because even though she's not related, she's interested. And so she was getting the thrill of the hunt herself. So she was getting something out of it. But she went out of her way, and she made copies and sent them to me. And so I thought, I said, I really like to thank you in some way other than saying thanks. So I said, I'd love to knit you something. Would you like socks, or would you like, this or like that? She said, and she sews, like she has made herself period costumes. She does basket weaving. So she's a crafty person herself. She understands what it is I'm offering her when I make this offer. And she said, well, I could really use some fingerless gloves, like with fingers in them that go like up to my elbow. And so we talked about color, whatever. And so I designed some for her, and specifically, and I sent them off to her. First thing she does is what every knitter loves, puts them on, takes a picture, sends me the picture. I love them. And then like this past winter, she's like, oh, because they got a lot of snow there. She's, oh, it's so cold. And she made a point of letting me know on Facebook that she was wearing those gloves that I had made her. And which is really, that's a gift to me then, that I've made something for somebody that they not only love, but they actually use. And then they let me know that they use them. Like this past winter, my friend at the dog park, who I made the gloves for, he'd have his camera there, and he'd catch my eye. He goes, I love these gloves. So that just makes I always feel like I'm the one that's getting the gift when people appreciate what I've knit for them so much. So that's what I mean, kind of, but that gifts are a symbol of a relationship that you have with people, especially when you can share things back and forth in some way. That gift just kind of is part of that glue of the relationship in some way. So, I have this box of wool here, this Swartbliss wool, and I knew, I bent down to get that postcard that I showed you earlier, and I saw something underneath all the hanks of wool. She sent me a calendar, you guys, a calendar of these sheep, and this is a favorite picture of mine that she's got on the back. She's got one of those old farmhouse stoves. They're called an aga, and they're always on, but all the animals are in there. I've seen during lambing season, one of those is like a plate warming thing. So sometimes if it's super cold out and a lamb's born and is really cold or it's struggling a little bit, they just stick the lamb inside the plate warmer for 10 minutes and kind of warm up, and which I think is great. So I'm going to have to go look at this calendar that I did not realize was in here. It's like an extra birthday present. So, I just love this. So, so that's it for this week. I'll see you guys next week. Thanks for watching.